Hello and welcome to FFRF's Ask an Atheist. I'm Chris Line, Rapid Legal Counsel at the Freedom from Religion Foundation.
And I'm Kyle Steinberg, Legal Fellow at FFRF.
We're using our new set here for the first time today. What do you think, Kyle?
I think it's new and fresh, and I'm excited to be here.
Good. Well, the set is a work in progress, so let us know in the comments how you feel about this new direction, and we can kind of implement that in the future. So today we are speaking with Caroline Stout, a former employee of the far-right group Turning Point USA, which is steeped in Christian nationalist messaging. After leaving the organization, Caroline began sharing her journey as a recovering conservative on TikTok. As of today, her first video has more than 1.3 million views. She's already built an audience of over 28,000 followers. Let's go ahead and play some clips from that video.
Hi, I'm Caroline, and I used to work for Charlie Kirk and Turning Point USA. As a privileged white woman in the conservative bubble, I was never forced to confront politics and really think for myself about what I believed in. So when I was 17 and I met Charlie Kirk and he talked about limited government and fiscal responsibility, it just made sense for me. And a lot of what I did was writing articles specifically designed to scare people and garner traffic and really just ratchet up the intensity of the political moment. And at the time, I thought that I was saving America. But then, in college, I was studying political science, and I started to learn how the world actually works. In the place where I was at, your political view was, like, number one, synonymous with your faith. It was like you almost worshipped politics. So that's when I pretty much quit Turning Point. And I said, this is not okay. I can't not talk about it. And so I want to share my experiences as somebody who used to be super conservative, who is now involved in liberal politics in small town Texas, and talk about how important it is for, if you are claiming a political party or political ideology, to really understand what it is you're talking about and what it is you're championing.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to be here.
It's great to have you. We also have our FFRF Governmental Affairs Coordinator, Caitlin Beret, with us. She was on the show a few weeks ago sharing her experience attending Turning Point USA's Young Women's Leadership Summit. So she should have a lot to weigh in on here too in terms of Turning Point. Hopefully we can kind of get her perspective on things as well.
So jumping into some questions for you, Caroline, can you just start off by telling us what kind of political and religious environment you were raised in?
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the ground floor for how I got involved with Turning Point and how I got involved in conservative politics. I grew up at a Baptist megachurch in Houston, Texas, where they were not afraid to have politicians like Ben Carson, Trey Gowdy, Rick Perry speak from the pulpit at the church. And so from a very early age, my political viewpoints were very interwoven in with my faith. And so it was never a question of what I actually believed in. It was more so, will I agree to the default of being a Christian conservative? So it grew up going to church, like 4 or 5 days a week. It was just from the start, a path that was laid out for me, and I willingly walked down because that was the default.
Yeah, and in one of your videos, I think you mentioned the idea that if you are Christian, you have to be conservative, and that kind of being the environment you were raised in. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. I was raised to believe, I was socialized to believe that you cannot be a liberal or a leftist or a Democrat and also be a Christian. So it was ingrained from a very early age, where if I was tempted to believe in leftist or progressive ideology, then that would counter my faith. And so it was inextricably tied together.
And then how do you go then from that environment to Turning Point USA? Like, how'd you first hear about it? How'd you first get involved? Like, how from, that upbringing did you then end up at Turning Point?
I was originally kind of involved in theater in high school, and I was like, well, I want to be an actress. But then I realized that may not have been the most realistic view, so I kind of decided to take off that hat and put on my politics hat because I had access to politics. My grandparents were RNC delegates. They were involved in the Harris County Republican Party. So I decided, hey, I think I'm gonna get involved in politics, whatever that means. And so when a young person gets involved in conservative politics, they get so excited and they just latch onto you and they really want you to be as involved as possible. So I did the typical political rounds of making and getting introduced to people, going to donor dinners, going to events, block walking. It was really a really quick high level of involvement. So this was in 2014, and so at this time, Charlie was going around doing a lot of fundraising for Turning Point because they'd been founded in 2012, and I think it just recently broke in $1 million in donations, and so he was going around doing fundraising. So I got invited as a quote unquote young person in politics to go to hear him speak and hear his pitch for Turning Point. And I went to this just kind of little event. There were probably like 20 high school, college age kids there. And he pitched Turning Point. And then the next day went to a donor dinner. And from then on, I was involved. I got on their list of student activists. I had started the Young Republicans chapter at my school, so we partnered with Turning Point on that. And then it was pretty quick that they invited me to go to CPAC with them, invited me to go to their Young Women's Leadership Summit, their first one that summer. And then within a year, I was employed by them.
So you started that by saying that you were invited. So you got into the political movement, and then you were invited by them, and then you mentioned that several times you were invited to different things. So it sounds like, was it more that they were pursuing you as a conservative activist, or did you take some initiative to join in with that? Like, how was it more of them pursuing you?
I think it was both. I think that on some level there is an intentional targeting of young people. So I think that would go to your point about pursuing me as a young activist, but I definitely was eager to be involved. So they weren't necessarily pushy to get me involved, but I think in a broader scheme of targeting young people is definitely their MO.
And what kind of tactics does Turning Point USA use to attract young people and to keep them engaged? Like, how were they able to keep you bought into sort of the mission and what they were doing once they kind of got you to be a part of the group?
They do a really good job at making their young activists and their ambassadors and students, whatever they're calling them that year, they make you feel really important. They make you feel like you are able to see past liberal brainwashing and that you're the exception and you're so smart. And so they really play on I think the insecurities that a lot of young people feel as you're trying to figure out who you are and figure out your place in the world. They say, here, you can have a place here. All you have to do is agree with us. All you have to do is accept what we have to say. Then they make you feel important and they make you feel like you're saving America. So that's how they keep students engaged, is by focusing on this manufactured crisis of democracy that really is by their own making, but creating this intensity where you feel like it is incumbent on you as an individual to stand between America and communism or the liberal elite or whatever enemy they want to platform that day.
From the inside, how would you describe Turning Point USA's real goals versus the public image, especially now? I know your TikToks have indicated that it might have changed in recent years.
I haven't been involved in the organization in 2017. I mean, so I haven't been involved since they've become more entrenched with the Trumpism and the Trump administration. So I can't speak to internally what their goals are now. I can speculate as to what they are based on their actions and based on what they do. But at the time, a lot of the focus was on building this, I don't want to say like army of high school and college students, but reaching as many as possible and exerting influence over them as a way to fight against this manufactured liberal indoctrination. When in reality, it's just the goal is to prevent college age high school students from engaging in free thinking and engaging in critical thinking. So that was kind of the high level goal. And then, of course, there's the practical goals of fundraising. No, to put it simply, fundraising. Like there were so many times there were donor dinners. There were so many times there were fundraising efforts, or at these events that are clearly sponsored, we would go and take a picture in front of Uline or something, and in an effort to appease big donors. So there's a lot of money at play as well.
Did you get to meet Charlie Kirk? Like, what kind of interactions might you have had with him? And if so, how did he come across to you?
When I worked for Turning Point as a field staffer, he wasn't my direct supervisor, but once I worked in their headquarters the summer after my freshman year of college, worked in their media. I worked fairly closely with Charlie, not like super, super close, but fairly closely. And then once I came on full time my sophomore year of college, I worked very closely with him on certain media efforts. I guess my take on him was, at the time, I never thought that there was anything nefarious. You know, I thought that his intentions were pure, because I believed that it was an actual war against leftism that we were fighting, and that generally the stakes were that high. And so I thought that he was principled, and I thought that he was fair. And personally speaking, like, he was great to work for. I never had any problems with him. And so it's so difficult now to reconcile that with what I see him saying today, and how just egregious a lot of his views and a lot of his actions are now. Because back then, the organization was, with fiscal responsibility, limited government. He said social issues that stays out of it. Like, that's not what we focus on. And so obviously the organization has deviated from that.
From our perspective, and what we know about Charlie Kirk, our issues are related to separation of church and state. And, we wanted to kind of point out that from the time you were there till now, his views on separation of church and state have changed quite a bit too. So we just have 2 video clips showing him back then and now that we want to kind of get your comment on.
I try to always advocate for every one of my political positions through a secular worldview, because that is the vast majority of people, and that's the government system that we have all decided to create. We do have a separation of church and state, and we should support that. With that being said, I can still have my own personal opinions and my own personal, ways to go about changing public policy. But when we start to say we should support this law because it's the Christian thing to do, that is, I think, that has turned people off for the last 30 years.
Going back to this idea of separation of church and state, and again, I could riff on this ad nauseum because it's just so ridiculous, right? Is that it's not constitutional, because you go a layer deeper. People that even say that, do you believe in separation of morality and state? Nobody does. So all laws are a reflection of morality. and all morality comes from somewhere. There is no such thing as neutral morality. And we believe what the founders believed because they put it in the halls of Congress, they put it in the Supreme Court, and they put it all throughout the country, which is that the Decalogue, the 10 Commandments, is the core morality of how a society and a civilization should exist.
So yeah, you see a pretty stark difference there from defending the separation of church and state. Does that kind of reflect your views on that and his changing over time? Which do you think is real? Do you think he just plays up for whatever audience he's at, or do you think this has been a real core change in time in him?
Yeah, I mean, the 2018 clip really rings familiar for me from my experience with the organization. That is much truer to the organization that I previously was a part of. Obviously, I don't align with the views from back then anymore, but back then it was much more focused on that secular worldview, because he would point out that that's why liberals win, is because we focus on the social issues. Obviously, we know that's not true, but that was kind of the refrain at the time. But from that 2018 clip, what really sticks out to me is in the end when he says, that's what puts people off. And so that indicates to me that even back then, he was much more concerned about what would play well to people. And so back then, having that secular worldview may have played better to, be it potential donors, be it potential student activists. And then in the past, 7 years, in the rise of Trumpism and this rise of just intense Christian nationalism, that does not play as well. I don't know if it's saying the quiet part out loud now. I don't know if it's just feeling emboldened to speak in a way that you actually believed in back then and you didn't think it would play well. I can't speak to that, but I don't think it matters, because what the change from 2018 to 2024 in those clips indicates to me is an element of opportunism. And I think that is a huge driving factor for the organization, because when Trump got elected the first time, that's when the shift in the organization started. Because I think that Charlie and I think that the leaders of the organization saw the writing on the wall that politics in America was changing and changing fast. So they were able to ride the coattails to gain influence and be in the room where decisions are made.
So I want to switch gears just a little bit, and I'm curious, Caroline, did you ever get to experience the Young Women's Leadership Summit?
Yes, I went to the first ever, so the inaugural Young Women's Leadership Summit back in 2015. Back then it was held outside of Chicago. That's where they were based at the time. So I went to that. That was a long time ago. I actually spoke on a panel at that event about, I think, just general student activism. So as you can see, I mean, I was 18 at the time. It was pretty quick that they platformed me. And so it was definitely way different than the YWLS that you see now, where you have people on stage talking about skinny America, talking about trad wives, talking about just promoting this Christian ideal. Back then it was a lot more about female empowerment and a lot more about women involved in politics and women involved in governance and how important that is. So that's another stark difference that is consistent with the change in politics over the last 10 years.
Yeah, Caitlin, do you have any thoughts or questions or anything? Because you had just gone to the most recent Young Women's Leadership Conference.
Young ladies need to be willing to submit to a godly man when you meet one. And if you're not willing to do that, then you got to pray about that.
Caroline touched on some differences, but I don't know if you have any questions or anything for her related to that, given your experience there.
Yeah, definitely. I'm very curious about the first ever summit, because everything I witnessed in June, it was the 10th anniversary of the Young Women's Leadership Summit, and everything that I heard was very much Charlie Kirk does not want women to be in the workforce. He doesn't want them to pursue higher education. He wants them to be restricted to the home, raising babies and being wives. and very like the most extreme ideology I've ever experienced in person. So I'm very curious if that ever translated into the workplace culture at Turning Point as a woman. Did those values weren't present when you were a Turning Point employee?
I mean, not even in the slightest. It's so crazy to see how the organization has changed, because back then the Charlie's counterpart, Charlie's kind of the spokesperson, a woman was running the organization, and there were a lot of women employees that were respected. I think there was probably, of course, more subconscious and internalized misogyny and paternalism present in the organization that just is just a part of Christianity, conservatism as a whole. But it wasn't as overt. There was nothing about like promoting this traditional women should be in the home, women should be submissive. That was never part of the organization, in my experience, at least.
Wow, that's really interesting. It's very interesting, the disconnect of current Turning Point USA of they don't want women to pursue education, but they're like a student activist group and they want to attract all these young women, but they don't want them to pursue the education to be part of a student activism group. It's very interesting.
Exactly. And I think that on one hand, there was that anti-intellectualism back then. There was that the criticism of higher education, whether it's the liberals are brainwashing you in higher education, there's that. But then also the idea of like, you don't need to go to college to be successful. Like if you're going and studying liberal arts, like you're wasting your you're wasting your tuition. So there was that kind of rhetoric back then. It just wasn't specifically targeted towards women. It was much more general. I will say that they did encourage me to drop out of college back when I was going to work full time for them. After my internship, my boss at the time said, you should just come work for us full time, move up here. You don't need to continue going to school. And I said, basically, like, are you crazy? I'm going to continue going to school. Like, that's ridiculous. And at the time, did I necessarily need to? No, because I wanted to work in the conservative media sphere. That was my goal at the time. And so there was a path forward for me to do that. But I knew inherently, no, I need to continue to get educated.
Wow. Great. Thank you for sharing that.
And so, Caroline, what exactly was your role at Turning Point USA? Like, what did you do on a day-to-day? Like, what was the job that you had there?
So there's a chronology for sure. In the spring of my freshman year of college, I was a field staffer. So I would table on campus. I would, and I went to Texas A&M University, so not like the beacon of liberalism. So I would table, have conversations with kids on campus, really as a way to build up their student activist database and their list of contacts of college students. Would hold events. I started the Turning Point USA chapter at Texas A&M. I partnered with some other universities. So that was more of the grassroots field activism that Turning Point really is pretty well known for. So that's what I did then. That summer, this is in 2016, I interned at their headquarters, which at the time was outside of Chicago. So with the internship, theoretically, you were supposed to rotate through different departments, like event planning, like donor relations, whatever. But I started in media and I stayed in media. And so they kept me there, and I did a lot of videos for them, those stupid memes that were big at the time in 2016. I would like manufacture those, roll those out, would do interviews, would help coordinate and run social media accounts. And so that was a lot of what I did that summer, as well as photographing and doing video at the various conferences, the Young Women's Leadership Summit, the Young Latino Leadership Summit, the high school student conference. And so that was a big part of what I did then. And then at the end of the summer, they wanted me to stay on full time working in media for them. They were working on also developing kind of the right's answer to BuzzFeed and Vice, which at the time, of course, were the big kind of listicle outlets at the time, and like young, like millennial news. And so developing that website, developing that infrastructure to push out news, and I use that term very loosely because obviously it's very biased and opinionated. So writing articles. And then I stayed on and was the operations manager for that online platform. So I managed all of the different contributors. I edited articles, wrote articles, and really pushed out what they wanted me to push out.
So on that journey through your different positions at Turning Point, was there a specific moment that you started to doubt the organization's message or mission?
I think that the more involved I got in the media side of it, the more I was able to recognize the bias that was inherent in everything that was being published. I was able to start to realize that there was an agenda. Because growing up, I had always believed, hey, Fox News is just Bible truth. Like, do not question Fox News. Like, that is unbiased, like fair and balanced at the time. So I really believed that. So I was not able to see through the veneer of conservative media until I was creating that media. And then I realized just how biased it was. And I had the thought of, hey, if we are working to try to persuade our audience, are other media sources doing that? Which at now as an adult, I laugh. I'm like, well, duh, obviously that's all it is. But at the time I was 18, 19 years old. I'd never engaged in that critical thinking of what is the purpose behind what is being sold to me. And so seeing that was when the cracks in the veneer started to form for me. And then as the 2016 election cycle went on, and the nastiness and the just really degrading language towards women and towards immigrants and minorities just got so normalized over the course of that election cycle. And that did not sit well with me. And I couldn't at the time identify why it didn't sit well with me. Now I know that that's my humanity, realizing that's not the way we should talk about other people or the politics we should engage in, the language we should use. That's when I really started to kind of question and undo the organization that I was aligning myself with.
Kind of related to that, you once contributed to a Turning Point USA publication called How to Debate Your Teacher and Win, warning that liberal teachers were brainwashing students. You wrote about feeling peer pressure as a liberal when you were in high school. Those authors might say you became exactly what you warned against now. How do you see that, and how do you feel about kind of working on this sort of material at that time? And how do you feel about that material now?
Yeah, it's really saddening to see, because I look at those words that I wrote, and I really believed in what I was writing. But now, like looking at like black sheep, the word black sheep, or like having like articulating like different views or being told to like shut up about conservative values, when in reality it was just people questioning arguably incorrect viewpoints. There was no hostility, no attempt at brainwashing when I look back in retrospect, but normal discourse and normal disagreement. I was primed to believe that that was an attempt to silence and brainwash me, when in reality, it's just typical political discourse that is healthy and important. And I was discouraged from engaging in that because of how it was portrayed as being hostile and aggressive toward me, which wasn't the case at all. So it's really laughable to look back, but I also do have compassion because I think I was in high school when I wrote that, and I didn't have uh, really the tools at the time to realize what I was being told was wrong. I don't excuse writing for that publication or any of the other work that I did, but I do recognize that I was primed to believe that any disagreement was inherently hostile and aggressive.
So, Caroline, I'm curious, do you have any stories from your time at Turning Point, whether that's just through your work or attending CPAC, anything that was really shocking to you or that stands out in your mind from that time?
Yeah, I've shared about this experience a couple of times, but when I was working and living, so we all lived in what was called the Liberty House when I was an intern. We all lived together. All of the six of us girls slept in bunk beds in the basement. The men upstairs had their own rooms. Do with that information, interpret that how you will. But we decided, I was really craving like Tex-Mex. So we decided to go get Tex-Mex. This is summer of 2016. So the heat of build the wall rhetoric, the red Make America Great Again hat had become synonymous with anti-immigrant rhetoric. And I wanted Tex-Mex. So we all get together, we go to this Tex-Mex place, and several of my Turning Point USA colleagues decided to don the red MAGA hat to go into this Tex-Mex restaurant. And I recall being so embarrassed and so shocked by this conduct because even before I was willing to admit to myself, I think I recognized that there was something wrong. There was something just inherently wrong and hateful and bigoted about the messaging that was inherent in MAGA. And so I remember being shocked, and I remember that was a huge moment for me because that's when I started to really think critically, like, okay, I'm aligning myself with these people. Like I sat, even if I wasn't comfortable, I sat at the table at this Tex-Mex restaurant with people wearing these MAGA hats, which is inherently threatening and intimidating intentionally. And I said like, hey, maybe let's not do that. But I also didn't want the conservative like ire to turn on me because it was in that time that there was a lot of rhetoric in the Turning Point world against social justice warriors. So if I were to take a stance that was promoting treating other people well, I would have been labeled a social justice warrior. And so I remember that being a really big moment for me where I had to really think long and hard, hey, this is not a group that I should be a part of. And I had aligned much more with the never Trumpers at the time. And so I never was MAGA, never was like super Trumpy. But like that I was still a part of an organization that did support those things. So that was a shocking moment for me, which seems pretty innocuous on its face, but when you think about how casual they were about just haha, like it was just a joke, like threatening and intimidating hardworking people who were serving us food. They thought that was funny. And I thought that was very telling to me about the direction of that entire ideology.
Yeah, that really seems illustrative of the culture at Turning Point. So I have to say, your first video on TikTok popped up on my For You page even before you posted your second one. And so it blew up pretty quickly. And I'm curious, what got you to start sharing your story on TikTok, and what has the reaction been to that?
I'd never been on TikTok before. It was my first video that I'd ever made. And looking at it now, like it's just really, really crazy how things developed from there. What prompted me to start sharing my story was really the headlines and the direction of our country. I mean, I've done work in my private life in liberal politics, and personally having conversations with people, personally campaigning. But I looked at the state of our country, the massive consolidation of executive power, and was just very disturbed by it. So I knew that back when I was rethinking my political ideology, the first step wasn't the critical thinking and the rethinking of my political ideology. The first step was giving myself permission to question my ideology, and that permission is what opened the door to all of the change and the critical thinking that followed. So if someone that I trusted had given me permission back then, it might not have taken the years that it did for me to reach the place that I am now. So my thought in posting this video is, if there's somebody out there who is involved with Turning Point, or is on the cusp, they've called themselves conservatives but might not really believe it, I wanted to give them permission to think really hard about what they were aligning themselves with. And I don't have kids now. I want to eventually, and I want to be able to 10 years from now look them in the eye and say that I did absolutely everything I could to preserve and save America. So that was what prompted me to start making TikToks and Instagram reels about politics and my experience.
It's awesome, and we're glad to have you doing that. It's just so important for someone like you to speak out who can reach these people and who they might listen to. Related to that, how can a secular group like us at FFRF better work to counteract Turning Point USA's influence, and how can we reach people? Because as you kind of noted, I think for a lot of these people, we're going to come off as enemy. You know, if we try to say, hey, you should come listen to us and kind of do what we're doing, we might come off as enemies to them. How do you think we at FFRF and other secular groups can we as organizations try to help reach the young people who might have different views like yourself before you kind of changed?
As I stated earlier, the political ideology and the faith upbringing are so interwoven that you can't question one without the other. And so I don't say question, but to question your political ideology, if you've grown up in a Christian conservative family and community of origin, it's very difficult to change your political views without also having a crisis of faith. And I went through that in like 2017, 2018, 2019, when I was undoing my programming of my political views. I also had to question my religious views. And so I did not have a safe place to do that. And so I think that secular groups can help by coming alongside people who are working on undoing their worldview, or the deconstruction movement is huge right now. And I've seen that with a lot of people who are ex-evangelicals, as it were. And I think that having that secular worldview available to inform the political views that are being broken down and then rebuilt would be very useful, because I back in 2017, 2018 really felt like I was going going through it blind. Like I literally like was like, okay, well, my political views are nothing now. My religious views are nothing. So I literally went on Google and I was like, book about atheism. Like I was like, I don't know, because I've never had interacted with that worldview before. Like I had always heard the like horror story of people going off to college and becoming a liberal atheist, and that was like worst case scenario for me. And then when it became reality, it was very challenging because I didn't feel like I had anyone that I could like process that with. So I think coming alongside people who are going on that journey will be very valuable, and pointing to the importance of looking at politics and policy and governance through a secular lens, and looking at what are our values. If like, even like as a Christian, I thought my value was alleviate suffering. Okay, what does that look like from a humanist or secular perspective? And so providing that context to people who are deconstructing, I think really, really goes a long way.
Yeah, and so one last question for you, Caroline, and you know, a lot of this is really heavy and can get sad. So I want to leave on a positive note here. But what gives you hope?
One thing that I'm holding on to is I have had so many ex-conservatives, ex-MAGAs, ex-Turning Point staffers and activists reach out to me on social media, on Instagram and on TikTok, and have communicated to me that I also realized that I was being conned. I also realized that this was a scam, that this was wrong. So there are people that are changing their minds. I think it's hard to see those people because there is a lot of shame involved in undoing your ideological worldview and then rebuilding it, because you have to admit you're wrong. You have to admit that you were lied to. But there are a lot of people who are going on that journey. So that's what I'm hoping in, especially moving forward into the midterm election cycle and 2028. If we have elections, I don't know. But like really leaning into that and leaning into the hope that there are people who are waking up to what's going on in our country right now.
Well, you certainly give us hope. If you can go from making propaganda for Turning Point USA to helping us fight against that propaganda, that gives me hope for the future, that there's more people like you out there. And so we want to thank you, Caroline, for coming on to our show this week. Can you tell us and our viewers how they can follow your TikTok and follow this work you do as you continue to share your journey?
Absolutely. So you can find me on TikTok and on Instagram at babyblue.tx. That's where I engage mostly. I am working on more consistently posting on Substack, but for now, we're just doing quick videos. And that's where you can see what I'm doing.
And we want to thank Caitlin, of course, for coming on, joining us as well in this conversation. We certainly appreciate your insight as well. So that's going to wrap up this week's episode of FFRF's Ask an Atheist. You can also check out Free Thought Radio at ffrf.org/radio or wherever you get your podcasts.
And be sure to check out the latest episode of We Dissent, the only podcast hosted exclusively by women constitutional lawyers discussing state-church separation. Listen and subscribe to We Dissent wherever you get your podcasts, or check us out online at we-dissent.org.
Finally, if you want more information about the Freedom from Religion Foundation, check out our website at ffrf.org. If you're a member already, thank you. If not, please join us, and we will see you next time on FFRF's Ask an Atheist.